Hey, what's up, Andy?
How you doing, Leon?
Good, man. Good, good, good. How are you?
Oh, brilliant, bro, brilliant.
Man, so good to see you again.
You too, you too. Hey, thanks so much for letting me come on your show. It was brilliant,
Dude,
brilliant to watch back.
thank you so much for having me on your show, man. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Oh, it's honestly the pleasure's mine. The pleasure's mine. Just
Absolutely.
so, just so everybody knows, this is Leon Garber, my old Pharrell bro.
Yeah, most definitely. We have like kind of like an outlaw family, right?
We do. That's bang on. That's bang on.
Yeah.
Like the song says, it's worldwide.
Yeah, and shout out to Vegas, man.
Oh, definitely shout out to Vegas.
So what's up, man? How are you?
Very good, bro. Very good. Vegas. Who's this guy? Oh. Just so everybody knows, this is Leon Garber. He's a philosophical writer. He writes for the Overall Online Network, the same website I write for. He has his own show on there, co-hosts with Alan. It's called Seize the Moment podcast, and he also has his own blog, which is called Leon's Existential Cafe,
Thank you.
which I'm a massive fan of. Excellent writing, excellent writing. Very very deep. Every time I read the articles and I've watched your shows, it's always deep thinking. It always gets me thinking about different subjects in a different kind of way. So I really do love reading the articles and watching your show. It's absolutely amazing.
Thank you so much, man. And I got so thank you. First of all, thank you so much for being one of my biggest supporters over the past few years.
Oh, for sure, for
So
sure.
just for our audience, like whenever I put something out there, Andy's usually one of like the first people to hit me up. So much appreciated,
No worries, bro. No worries. Pleasure's mine. Honestly, I'm one of your biggest fans.
man. Thank you so much. And like I'm always tuning into the Heart of an Outlaw, man. So I really respect and appreciate like what you
Oh,
put out with your show, man.
thanks so much. I see you always pop up. You're one of the first. I want to go live. You're one of the first to pop up. So I appreciate that. I really do
Oh,
appreciate that.
and actually that kind of sucks because usually like when I do your show, I'm always like in the chat and I'm always saying stuff and I'm like, damn, now I can't even contribute to the chat.
I do actually see the chat. I try to scroll, and I see all your
Yup.
comments. But
Mhm.
no, I do really do. I think we've got the mutual love for each other, right?
Absolutely, man. Yeah,
For
most
sure,
definitely.
for sure.
And
So let's get.
I have always loved like not only the name of your show but of your blog, The Heart of an Outlaw. I wanted to ask you on our podcast, but I forgot. Like, how did you come up with the name Heart of an Outlaw?
Do you know? I had the blog, the Have an Outlaw blog, and I just wanted to build on that because I thought that's kind of we come up with that creation like Vegas put it out there for a blog. I was open to the idea of the blog, and we just come up with the idea for Heart of an Outlaw. And when it comes to thinking about names for the actual show, that was one of me. That was one of me. The name for the show that I wanted. There was about 3 or 4 different names, and we going back and forth to Vegas. We couldn't. What's the word? We couldn't come up with like pick one out. If you know what I mean, we couldn't. So we just went with Heart of an Outlaw, and I think it. I don't know. I think it goes. I
Yeah,
think it
yeah,
goes.
yeah. It would have been like a dope title for a song if somebody like had a song called Heart of an Outlaw. So I mean, kind of shout out to Edie. I hope maybe he could use that as a title for one of his future songs.
Oh, do you know what that
late night with
what idea that was?
late night with Andy. Right?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. I'm on.
But but by the way, man, how's like is my sound okay?
You sounds great. Yeah, you sounds good to me.
Oh, okay, cool, cool. Just making sure.
Uh-huh. Yeah. If the sound's off, let us know in the comments.
Okay.
But yeah, it's great for me. But yeah, that would be a dope song if Edie's watching.
Hmm.
We've got a title for the song.
Or imagine that for like an album title, like for Edie and Noble, man, Heart of an Outlaw. How dope would that be?
Oh wow, that would be the dopest. That I think they actually put something on the social media a few months back, something about what should we call our next album or potentially the final album. Not too sure. I think they was throwing the ideas about. So maybe I should scroll back and maybe put it out there. Heart of an Outlaw, maybe. Who knows?
Hmm. I hope it's not the final album.
Oh, I know. That's disappointing a lot of fans, but hey, they've been one of the dopest hip hop groups, you know, ever. I think. I mean, their music's touched fans throughout the world. So,
Yeah.
like yourself, myself, you know, and I know people in the UK, up and down the UK, who love the Outlaws. So, you know, they've touched millions of fans. So let's hope and pray that it's not the last album, but
Yeah.
fingers
And
crossed.
you ever notice like with their music that it feels like they're all kind of pieces of a puzzle and like they kind of complete each other when you listen, like especially with the Still I Rise album, which by the way I listen to like almost every other day at the very least. So and it feels like it's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle with all of them, and each of them have like a piece of it, right? And it's like, you know, Pac is like, you know, the strong or the leader, the strong one, and then you kind of have like, you know, the other pieces with like Napoleon and Edie, and they all have something important to say.
Definitely. I think they've grown. You can see the changes that they've made in maybe in the lifestyles from going back from like 95, 96 up until now, the latest albums, and even the solo projects, what Noble's coming out with, Edie's coming out with, the maturity, you can, if like you've just said, it's like a piece of the puzzle, isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember the Novocaine album was like one of my favorites. Even though like obviously that was I think one of like the first ones after Pac passed away, and it wasn't like, you know, commercially as successful, but like it was crazy, man. Like it was such a good album, like really sort of underrated.
Sure. Like Vegas had just said, wait till you hear it in 20 years.
Most definitely.
So hey, let's crack on with Leon. Hey, what inspired you to get into your field, which is counselling and psychology?
Oh, good question, man. So back when I was in college, I was actually studying criminal justice. Maybe I think the path to becoming a lawyer, although I wasn't really sure at the time. It didn't feed my soul. So to be honest, and like as corny as that sounds, and like just the material itself was sort of interesting, but not really. And then I discovered this guy named Carl Jung. So Carl Jung was like this really kind of mystical, like philosopher slash psychologist, right? And he kind of realized that he had these ideas, right, that came from like ages ago, right? From ancient philosophy and all the way down to like medieval philosophy and even kind of modern philosophy, but more so the ancient and medieval ones. And he realized that some of these ideas are like really helpful for people. And so like when he talked about practicing his psychology and sort of doing psychotherapy with people, he sort of talked about passing on this wisdom to people that really helped them lead better lives. So for me, I was like, okay, I could continue kind of with law and doing this thing that's a little bit bland and kind of dry. I mean, it would have been, look, maybe it would have been a cool field because like there's a lot of arguing in there, you know, you get to kind of be this sort of star or show in the courtroom or whatever, which is sort of cool. But like there was no meaning in it, to be honest with you. I mean, maybe if you're like a public defense attorney, I guess, cool. But for me, it's like the meaning really comes from the interactions that you have with people and the fact that like these ideas that have passed on through the ages, right? These aren't ideas that are really available to that many people if you think about it. So I was like, oh shit, like here's this guy, Carl Jung, right, who had this really sort of this breadth or this plethora of knowledge, and he used it to help people like lead kind of more fulfilling, maybe not happier, but let's say more fulfilling lives. And when I read that and I read like some of the cases that he talked about, I was like, no, like this is for me, this is what I have to do for a living. And yeah, and then kind of going on to my blog, it was just a way for me to reach like more people. And so I figured like if these ideas in psychology can help my clients or my patients, 100% they could help the people like kind of, you know, on the World Wide Web.
Of course. That was one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, actually, with your blog. So did you start your blog first? How did the blog come about?
Oh, that's a good question. Wow, I think I started in, I think it was the beginning of 2018, and I started with this post called My Friend Death. So, right. So this was like one of those ideas that I'm talking about that's kind of like, you know, passed on through the ages. So I decided, I was like, you know, a lot of the times, like we're really afraid of dying and kind of our mortality, you know, kind of death in general, by the way, not just our own death, but like other people passing away, etc. Right. And so kind of philosophers from ages ago realized that actually death could be a really good concept. Like it could be a really healthy and helpful concept. The problem is we only focus on the negative side of it. So I figured, oh, like, let me just see what happens. Like, so I'm going to write this article. I'm going to kind of put it out on the web and just to see if like people kind of like my concept, which is not mine. it's technically, belongs to the sort of the annals of time. It's not mine. But like, I would just wanted to see what it would be like if people like, heard the other side of death, right? The positive side, the idea that you could live a more satisfying life if you have what's called having death on your tongue. If you constantly think about your mortality, or if you're aware more so of like your mortality in the context of the present moments, what would that look like or feel like? And I actually got a pretty reasonably good response. It wasn't great. I mean, I was like pretty much a nobody at the time, even though I'm still like, still nobody kind of, but whatever. But the point is, like, back then I was a super nobody. So when I got the response for the blog, people were like, oh wow, like this is really interesting. I haven't really thought about it that way. Usually I'm afraid to think about death, and usually I'm afraid to think about my own death. And so they said, wow, this kind of makes it a little bit easier now, or at least it sort of puts it into a broader sort of focus for me. And then kind of as I did that, I ended up going on and writing about different topics like self-esteem, love is a big one. Let's say kind of depression, anxiety, sort of even the possible benefits of the two, even though obviously they become clinical disorders, right? They're actually not all bad. So for me, kind of like something that you spoke to in the beginning, that you kind of saw like, sort of the, I guess, the deeper wisdom of these topics, or you kind of saw the other parts of them. That was important for me. It was important to help people see that like these topics or these subjects that seem wholly bad are actually not as bad as people think they are. Again, like the concept of death.
Sure. You just touched on something there where you just said you're actually a nobody. Well, we don't see that because you're actually helping people. You're putting these articles out. You're writing about these subjects which are helping people worldwide. I'm reading. These people reading them across the world. So you're actually helping people. You're putting them ideas out to the people worldwide. So you're actually, Leon, don't put yourself down. You are somebody to a lot of people.
Thanks a lot, man. I really do appreciate that.
Sure. But hey, that's kind of like I say. Every time I read your articles and I watch your videos, taking the subject from a different angle, and what you've just said there, it's like blew my mind again.
Yeah.
It's awesome to see the origins of your blog, coming from what you wanting to be to go into law, coming right to where you are now, dealing with the mental health, anxiety, and so forth. Something about 2020. I mean, it's been a very unusual year. I mean, personally, I've seen people who I know personally go through quite a lot of stress, anxiety. Not wanting to go out the house because of COVID, and so forth. I mean, have you seen an increase in your client base, or an increase in like a decrease in mental health where you are?
Yeah, man, actually both. So there's definitely been an increase like in people wanting to or reaching out to therapists for therapy, and there's definitely been a decrease in mental health. So going back to this idea, or going back, let's say, to the notion of like how ideas could be both good and bad, people usually hate actually being alone with their own thoughts. And so, as I'm sure you know, right, especially with people kind of living by themselves, or let's say maybe living with a roommate who, I don't know, let's say maybe they don't really kind of like, let's say they're not in much contact with, or they're not really close with. People have been really forced to like face themselves. And sort of COVID has been this kind of like internal mirror in some sense. So for the most part, kind of what people realize is that like, oh shit, now I really actually do have to face my problems. And you know what, maybe it's better to just have a therapist, because it's like, if I'm just talking to myself, I'm just going to, beat the hell out of myself. So I'd rather have like a therapist to help me through these problems. So, COVID's definitely, obviously, for the most part, been a really terrible thing. But there are some instances where part of it has been good, where just for the simple fact that people have been more introspective and looking at the kind of decisions they've been making, looking at sort of what's meaningful and what's valuable to them. What's so cool is that like for a lot of people who, let's say if you didn't like have any, I don't know, real sort of financial constraint, if let's say you didn't lose your job, or let's say, I don't know, your family is relatively healthy, for the most part, I mean, the most difficult aspect for them is the, the isolation and the social distancing. So for them who don't really have any particularly pressing needs, what's so cool is that now you can start talking about the deeper sort of things of life, or the deeper values of life. And a lot of times it's like, and I'm sure you see this all the time too, where people kind of go through their lives, you know, sort of, they kind of think about like checklists and things that they have to do. Maybe they'll focus on some past regrets or something like that, but it's also not that common. But for the most part, really, we don't think about our lives enough, or again, the decisions that we're making. So what's been so cool about COVID, again, not that COVID in itself is a good thing, obviously, for the most part, it's terrible. But what has been good for some people is that they've been more introspective, and they've been really thinking about, you know, what is my life going to look like in 5, 10 years, and am I going to be happy with it?
Sure. Wow, that's an excellent way to look at this terrible year that we've been going through.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give on a personal level to somebody who's in that situation where they don't want to come out, they're watching the news, let's say, for example, and I mean, I know friends who have literally terrified of coming out of the house.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you put across to people like that?
Okay, so this is a really tough one because I definitely want to be sensitive about it. So I don't know, obviously, everybody's personal situation. So even if I say like, okay, here's like the good side or the potentially good side of this, I want to be clear in saying I don't know everybody's personal situation. So I can't say, hey, you know, like buck up, or like, hey, you know, here, like just focus on the good or whatever. So I can't say that for everybody individually, right?
Yeah.
But what I can do is say, like, look, if you feel like if let's say your life is relatively similar, you know, kind of outside of obviously social distancing, and let's say there's no sort of particular tragedy, you still have your career, your job or whatnot, I would say the thing to focus on is literally the fact that this is maybe the time for you to start making some big decisions and to really figure out like what it is you regret, why you regret it, what's held you back, why are you afraid of, you know, X, Y, and Z, and if it's possible for you to overcome that fear, and if it is, what could that potentially look like? So pretty much the thing is, like, again, going back to the notion of the internal mirror, it gives us the potential to continue to look inward and to ask ourselves, literally, what is it that's holding me back from either the person that I want to become or the life I want to lead? What is it that's holding me back from maybe relationships that I've wanted to have, but, you know, I kind of cast away for, you know, X, Y, and Z reason? What sort of maybe kept me away from people? What's kept me away from sort of the professional things that I wanted to achieve? Maybe from applying to certain positions, from switching careers potentially. You know, pretty much the idea is like, what is it that's held me back from the life that I wanted to lead?
Sure. I like Vegas there. I would say an appointment with Leon. Definitely make an appointment with Leon. Definitely.
Vegas could be the first.
Getting back to your blog, I love that. I love your slogan. I noticed your slogan a few months ago. It was "Ideas are medicine," and that's just bang on. That is just bang on. I love that slogan. So when with the blog, you started writing out that article. Did you have any when you finished that article? Did you have like a plan to do certain subjects for the blog, or you just rolled with it?
Good question. So yeah, so my blog was initially supposed to be just purely existential. So when it comes to like existential philosophy and psychology, the issues are usually regarding, like, let's say death, right? So death, the meaning of life, or kind of like the inherent perceived, you know, kind of meaninglessness of the world, and kind of how do we cope with that. The fact that you and I will always be disconnected to some extent because I am one human being, you are another human being. And then also the fact that like there's freedom, right? So we to some extent get to choose what our lives are going to become, you know, going back to that idea of like, you know, the mirror or whatnot and the decisions that we make. So we're the ones who get to choose the blueprint for our lives, right? Nobody kind of does it for us. So I was only going to write about that for a while. And then I figured, you know, love is also important. Self-esteem is super important, because without self-esteem, I mean, there's really not much else. It's kind of the foundation for life, for our lives. And what else did I write about? So, I mean, depression and anxiety and how it kind of relates to all of these issues, obviously. Oh, and then trauma was a big one for me a little bit later, even though initially I don't remember planning on actually focusing on it. But trauma was a big one just because I am technically a trauma therapist. And so I started writing about like attachment styles and how people who are traumatized, they become like very sort of anxious, and they're afraid that, like, you know, their partner is going to leave them, or they kind of avoid intimacy and relationships altogether. So I thought that that was going to be a really sort of a big kind of focal point, or a big sort of I guess it itself was going to lead to a breadth of topics that I could cover on the blog. So I guess it's all of those things, and probably even more that I can't think of right now.
Sure. Great answer. So, I mean, what do you see the most important factors in your field? You know, when you're talking to your clients and giving them advice and giving this great deep thinking, deep thoughts. What do you think is the most important factor and skill set to have in your line of work?
Oh, dude, that's such a good question. So critical thinking. So critical thinking, although it's not like, I guess it's not the end all or be all of mental health, but let's say it's one of the most important aspects of it. So where people tend to get stuck is like they sort of think, so they think irrationally, let's say, kind of for lack of a better term, right? So we have like these two forms of thinking. So system one thinking is pretty much like our quick intuitive conclusions, right? So where we would say like, I'm a loser, or I'm a failure, or this person is this, or this person's a piece of shit, or whatever, right? And then we have the system two thinking, which is way more nuanced, right? It takes sort of the bigger picture and the broader perspective of our lives, of ourselves, of other people, of sort of like what's going on in the world. So what I try my best to do is to help people move on to that secondary thinking. So it's not to say that system one is like bad in itself, because it's not that black and white, but the point is you can easily be trapped in system one thinking. And like when people struggle with depression or anxiety on a clinical level, it's usually connected, I would say all of the time, I don't even want to say usually, it's connected to these distorted thinking patterns. So we often have a really toxic way of viewing the world. So what I try my best to help people do is I try to help them become more independent by becoming more independent thinkers.
Wow. That's mind blowing again. Because like I said, when I was on your podcast a few days ago, I went through depression myself. So actually hearing something like that, I didn't know if there was two different types like that. I was just thought, I'm depressed, I'm going through these thoughts, I'm having these crazy thoughts that I've never had before.
Yeah.
So to hear something like that, that's like kind of refreshing to know that there's like science behind it, scientific, it's all science based.
Yeah, and philosophy. That's even just as important, because like my thinking is like all psychology or whatever psychiatry, it's based in philosophy. So like a lot of these like critical thinking sort of tools, right? They're philosophical. I mean, these are philosophers who taught us how to think better. And what the psychologists saw was that like, oh, if you actually start thinking better, you'll start feeling better. So again, this is not like a cure-all or anything. I'm not saying you're never going to experience depression if you learn like, let's say critical thinking skills. The point is you're just going to experience it, hopefully, kind of on average. You would experience it less often and less frequently. So the problem is, like, let's say when I was struggling with depression at some point, my thinking was really bad. So like anybody who knew me would tell you I was probably the most pessimistic person they'd ever met. I was awful. Like I was cynical, I was pessimistic, right? Just really, really flawed thinking. I would frequently like focus on the negatives of like every situation I found myself in. And then when I felt like hopeless about something, it was because I would just convince myself that whatever this, kind of endeavor or thing is that I'm pursuing, there's no chance it's ever going to work out. So I kind of like, I kind of beat myself down before I gave myself the chance to actually try and maybe even succeed. So you kind of learn that like, oh shit, maybe my depression isn't solely based on the events in my life. Maybe in some way I'm contributing to it. And by the way, that was probably one of the best insights my own therapist told me. She said something along the lines of, she's like, dude, you like do a lot to contribute to your depression. I remember being so pissed off at her. I was like, whoa. I was like, who the fuck does she think she is? So, but then like after thinking about it, I was like, yeah, but she actually is right. Like I do contribute like heavily to my depression. She's like, dude, like you literally, you talk everything down, or you talk like yourself out of everything, right? You put everything down. Anything that's good in your life, you devalue. Let's say in the rejection and the failures or whatever, you can significantly magnify. And she's like, of course you're going to be depressed. And she's like, but like, what are you like actually doing? Like, are you actually like trying to get yourself out of it? And I was like, wow, man, holy shit, she's actually right.
Sure, it's like that. Is the glass half full, or is it glass half empty kind of thing? It's the way it's the way you look at things.
Yeah, it is true, and I think it is to a great extent, because if you think about it, all of our lives like are going to be bad to some extent, for the rest of them. And so I mean, look, it could be argued that yes, some people definitely suffer more than others. I don't doubt that, obviously, right? And my life is relatively like pretty decent compared to obviously other people's. But my thinking is, and this is going back to like Viktor Frankl, who was literally survived the Holocaust. However, he was able to do it, right? Again, going back to like Stoic philosophy and changing his thinking, he was able to survive it literally by changing his perspective and creating meaning out of a situation. So look, I just want to be like really sort of clear on my saying this because I haven't been through that or anything close to that. So me reframing my thinking is way easier than somebody who's, I don't know, let's say, you know, kind of like working at some warehouse in China as a, you know, kind of a child labor or whatever. So I can't really speak on that. But it's interesting to me that somebody like Franco could do that, because for me, then it says, oh, you know what, maybe my situation isn't so bad. And if he could do it, that means I could probably do it too.
Sure, sure. Going back to your own experiences there, you mentioned your own depression. I mean, does that help you in helping your clients?
Oh yeah, so why it's such a big help for me is because all of the like shit that they go through and all of like the different defenses that they have and like the kind of let's say the sabotaging decisions that they made, I made them all myself. So like when somebody kind of like acts out or gets out of line or whatever, I'm like, yeah, I know what you're doing. You're just pushing me away. So like this is all stuff I've done in my life, whether it was with like other people, whether it was my own therapist. I actually abruptly ended therapy the second time around because I was like, man, this isn't for me or whatever. So I've done all of this stuff. So it helps me knowing like, so if I could kind of like sort of personalize it and see it from my own perspective, it just helps me understand why they're doing what they're doing and to kind of depersonalize and to see that, oh, it's not that they don't respect me. I mean, even if they don't respect me, the idea is like they don't respect me because they're afraid. That's what it really comes down to. And I've done all of this stuff. All of the stuff that my clients have pulled, I've to one extent or another pulled it too.
Wow, wow. I suppose it's good for your clients to know that you've been in their shoes. I'm guessing, you know, when you actually tell them that you've been there, you know how they feel.
Yeah, and by the way, that can actually really backfire too. So sometimes when you tell a person you know how they feel, they're like, no, you actually don't know how I feel. And to some extent that is true because I haven't been specifically to every experience that they've had, obviously. So I would say you really have to like pick and choose who you say that to. So it's like if your situation was similar, then yes, it would work. But if your situation, even if let's say you both experienced depression, but they went through some sort of like, I don't know, really severe physical abuse or trauma and you haven't, it'd probably be best not to say that.
Yeah, keep them.
Yeah.
Sure, sure. We were talking about social media the other day when when I appeared on your show. Do you get a lot of clients who look at people on social media, some celebrities, models, sports people, and think, actually, I want to be that, and maybe they've realised they can't be X, Y, and Z. They can't be. You mentioned The Rock. You can't be these superstars who post, the fame, the glitz, the glamour, and that's not attainable. So, do you come across clients or people in your field that actually want the fame or want these things and realize they can, so they get down, depressed?
Yeah, man. Really, really good question. So yeah, so there's something called body dysmorphic disorder, which pretty much means like you focus on like all of your flaws, right? And by the way, I'm sure you know of the other version since you were a bodybuilder, muscle dysmorphia, where you don't think you're big enough or muscular enough, right. So so people with body dysmorphia, I mean, they pretty much focus on all of their flaws, and not only do they hyper focus on them, but in their minds and in their kind of perceptions, right? The flaws are actually significantly exaggerated. So let's say when they look at somebody like The Rock, and let's say they do go to the gym, I don't know, 2-3 times a week or whatever, they're not that much, it's not that different. I know people would listen and say, oh my God, no, of course, like nobody looks like The Rock. There are shades of gray here, right? So let's say if you're in relatively good shape, you're not that far away, right? But the point is that in their minds, they're like, oh my God, I look awful or terrible, right? And then The Rock looks phenomenal and great, right? Very sort of black and white. So when people kind of come in, right, it's very hard, obviously, convincing them otherwise, because in their minds, they're like, this is great, and this is like what matters, and everything else is shit. So yes, so to answer your question, yes. So people, a lot of times, especially in the city, they hold themselves up to absurd standards because oftentimes they don't take context into consideration. So when we talked on our show, right, we talked about like, especially with you in your life, right, it's very hard to have 3 kids, right, to have a wife, a job, etc., and then to go to the gym 6 days a week. It's not going to happen. Right. Exactly. So people think like, oh, well, I don't care. Like if The Rock can do it, I can do it. It's like, no, dude, The Rock literally does this for a living. Like his whole paycheck depends on him looking that way. For you, right, who, let's say, I don't know, is an engineer or something, right? You don't need that. So that could be like a nice bonus if you can make it work. But for the most part, it's not going to happen. So, but where people get trapped on Instagram, right, again, going back to that idea of perspective, number one, they don't see the perspective of this is my life as opposed to this life. And then they also don't see the things that these other people people are missing, right? Like, let's say most of the like Instagram celebrities or whatever, they're not highly educated, and that's cool. That's not what they want, right? They spend most of the time focusing on their looks, on working out, building their social network, etc., right? And then so maybe the person who is comparing him or herself to that Instagram celebrity, maybe they have a master's degree, right? Or maybe, I don't even know, they have like a bachelor's degree in some like noteworthy field, and for them it's like they have this great career that they love, but yes, they're not like, I don't know, let's say if you're like a dude and you like really want to be a weightlifter, let's say you're not 200 pounds and, you know, just like bulging muscles, right? And that, to me, like, that's cool, right? But yeah, a lot of people do struggle with that because they think, and by the way, what people mostly do is they compare like someone's positive to their negative. So again, perspective, right? I'm not comparing myself to The Rock and saying like, oh, well, you know what? Like, I have a master's degree or whatever and The Rock doesn't. I'm saying, oh my God, I look like shit and The Rock looks great. What the fuck?
I can definitely relate that to that from your bodybuilding days, like I say, with the muscle dysmorphia. You know, I used to look in the mirror and think, you know, I look like that, when in reality other people see me and I you know, bulging muscles, this, that, and the other. So I kind of relate to how them kind of people can feel, you know. But in reality, I look like a beast, but in my head, I look scrawny. I look really.
Oh, and did you know that Arnold Schwarzenegger like went through the same stuff, that he suffered with body dysmorphia too?
Yes.
Yeah, crazy, right? So like Arnold would literally look in the mirror after winning a Mr. Olympia contest and be like, "Look at you, you fat pig! You look like shit."
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah.
How it gets your mind, and that's one of the main reasons why I give it in. I just couldn't hack how it was making me feel. So. And I didn't think it was worth it with all these negative thoughts, so I just jacked it in. But
yeah, and what's interesting is that I don't even think like to get to that level that you can actually do it without beating the shit out of yourself. Like look at even Mike Tyson, right? Mike Tyson's like, oh, I had to give up working out because literally I became an egomaniac. And then after like whatever it was 2 months after that initial Rogan interview, he's like, oh yeah, I became obsessed again and I'm doing this all over again. Forget it. He's like, my wife wanted me to work out for 15 minutes a day. I turned that into 2 hours because it's like that monster within like ends up coming out. And then you're like, oh, what are you doing? You're only doing 15 minutes a day? Like, you pussy.
Sure. I just seen a picture before, actually. It was a few hours ago of Mike Tyson. What he looks like now, wow. He's in crazy shape.
Yeah, and I mean, and it takes like that self-discipline. I really think it comes from like self-flagellation, man. I really think you need to beat the shit out of yourself to look like that. And look, man, I mean, for Mike Tyson, here's the interesting thing about, like, I guess his personality style. I'm not against it per se. What I try to help people do more than anything is to actually choose what they want to do, but to know what they're getting themselves into. So like, let's say somebody like Mike Tyson came into my office and he's like, hey bro, like, look, I don't want you to talk me out of weightlifting. Like, this is the thing that's going to make me happy. So I'm not here for that, right? Let's say, I don't know, whatever, he comes for something else. And okay, but then the idea is like, what I would want him to know is that, okay, if you continue to do this to yourself, these are the side effects, right? So you're going to have a little bit of like happiness and maybe a little bit of glory, and for the most part you're going to feel like shit throughout the day because nothing is ever going to feel good enough. If that's the type of life you think you want, right, just, you know, kind of putting it all out on the table for you, okay, that's cool. And I've had people who've come in and, you know, they said, hey, you know what, I know like this isn't like good for me or this isn't healthy, but this is what I want to do, like in order to achieve X, Y, or Z again, like I know I need to put myself through this. That's cool, as long as you know what you're getting yourself into. Because I think a lot of times when people compare themselves to like these Instagram celebrities, they don't know what they're getting themselves into. It's like what Michael Jordan said, right? In that, what was the documentary that they just did? The Netflix one. Oh my God, I can't believe I forgot the name.
Yeah, whatever. I forgot the name, but I know which one you're on about.
Yeah. So, wow, I can't believe I forgot it. Whatever. So the one that was on like Netflix and ESPN. Yeah. So Michael Jordan is like, dude, like people don't want to be me. He's like, you have no idea what it's like to be Michael Jordan. You don't want this. He's like, you think you want this because you see everything on the outside. You know, you see whatever like photographs, right? The Last Dance. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. Yeah, he's like, you know, you all see the photographs and whatnot, but he's like, you guys, like, you don't know what it's like to be me. You don't know what it's like to train every single day. You don't know what it's like to kind of, and he wasn't drinking at the time. So he's like, you don't know what it's like to kind of forego partying and everything. And yeah, and people want like the results, but they're like, oh, but I don't really know what it takes to get there. So my whole purpose is to get the person to see, they're like, hey, you could be like Mike Tyson if you want. That's cool, but here's what you're sacrificing.
Brilliant way of putting things, Leon. Excellent answer. Again, you know, looking at things at a different perspective. Brilliant answer. So how do you get started with the O4L Online Network?
Oh, okay, good question. So actually, so I don't exactly know how this happened, but I think it was because I wrote the article about like how Tupac influenced me, called "The Medicinal Words of Tupac Shakur," and I ended up tagging the Outlaws in it, right? So I'm assuming this is how Vegas found me. So then Vegas actually reached out to me, and he's like, "Hey man, what's up? I'm Vegas, the founder of O4L. Would you want to write for us?" And I was like, "Yeah." Like, you don't even have to ask. I was like, "Hell yeah, I want to write for you guys." And so he told me the background, and he's like, like this is what O4L is. Like, we're for the most part focusing on the Outlaws right now, but he told me he wanted to expand the network and have like different shows on it, different types of bloggers and whatnot. Like he pretty much wanted it to be like a media network in itself. I was like, cool. I was definitely on board. So the first article that I wrote was actually the replica of that article, and it was The Medicinal Words of Tupac Shakur, about like what is music and life meant to me.
Sure. Wow. So how did you progress from writing about that to going on to the Seize the Moment podcast? How did that come up?
That's a good question. Okay, so initially, like with the blog, right? So the blog was doing okay, like no complaints about it, but like I kind of realized that for the most part, people really don't like to read blogs that much, and it seemed like blogs are a little bit dying out. So I was like, what do people like, right? They like podcasts, right? And I was like, oh man, like podcasts are actually like pretty like in right now. Like people love listening to podcasts. Whereas like it seems like with blogs, they were a little bit more popular, like let's say in the late 2000s, but now that like podcasting became a thing, that seems to be the major area of like spreading information. So I actually had a conversation with Alan one day. Literally, we still like talk about this. So we were like drinking, smoking cigars, right? We're out like, I think we were like in Pennsylvania or upstate somewhere, whatever it was, right? So we're like outside, right? We're all like drinking and smoking cigars. And I was like, Alan, you want to start a podcast? And he's like, what? And I was like, yeah, no, like seriously. He's like, you want to start a podcast? I was like, think about it, right? We have like, kind of things to talk about. We have the same kind of interest. And it's like, you kind of have like this platform of Ego Ends Now. I have my cafe, right? We all want to kind of spread these ideas related to like philosophy and mental health. Sure. And we want to help people develop and lead like happier lives or more fulfilling ones. I was like, dude, let's just start a podcast and see what happens. And Alan was like, okay, I like didn't think that was like a possibility, but sure. And then I hit Vegas up. Vegas loved the idea. And he's like, yeah, man, whatever you guys need, just let me know. And literally just like that, almost overnight, we're like, all right, I guess we're doing this. We're starting a podcast. And then we were talking about it. And we're like, we could actually maybe get some guests too. Because like, we're not experts in everything, obviously. Maybe we could get other people who know more than we do about subjects. Then we started getting guests and boom.
Wow. What a story, eh? What a story.
Yeah, literally just some shit that we were like spitballing one day, and we're like, yo, we can do this. We can make this work. Like, why not? Why not us?
Sure. It was kind of similar with myself. I was writing the articles and interviewing various people, more to do with Tupac and hip hop, and I had the Tupac art inspiration. So, and I kind of literally, like you guys, I kind of thought maybe I can do either a podcast like yourselves. I took inspiration from your podcast. And then maybe why not a video? And shot Vegas the message, throwing the idea about, and that's how it come about. And hey, here I am, and here we are as as a team. And so, from when you first joined the site to now, how do you think the expansion's gone with the website?
So really dope. So I'm not only like really happy, obviously, that I got to be a writer for it. And by the way, dude, one of the coolest things that has ever happened to me, and Vegas knows this, was having like Edie retweet my blogs. I was like, dude, I remember having text. I was like, yo, Edie just retweeted my blog. Holy shit. So that was like the coolest thing ever. He retweeted like my blog on James Baldwin. And then he did another one, I think, of something I wrote about Pac. So that was like really, really, really cool. So that was really awesome, right? But then like to move into the show aspect was really cool, just for the simple fact that obviously we got to talk to like people I would have probably never met in real life. And then, and the fact that I think what's so cool about what we're doing is the fact that like we literally moved on to the showpiece. And so let me see how I can phrase this. I'm just gonna say this. Look, I feel like you and I and Alan, like we have a lot to offer. Like that's just how it is. I don't want to like. It's not. I hope it doesn't sound like me gloating about it, but I truly believe it. And I feel like we offer a platform for people that, let's say, it's not that it's the only one, obviously, but I feel like it's unique, right? So for us, what I like the most about the expansion is I feel like we can put people in the spotlight in a way that hasn't been done before, or in a way maybe that might not ever be done. So like the questions that you and I like might ask these people, right? Like our guests. what's dope is that I find that like a lot of times people don't ask them these questions. Like we had a whole conversation with Napoleon about philosophy, right? I mean, look, maybe it's been done elsewhere, which is cool, but I felt like for us, I was like, oh, you know, maybe we don't have to talk about like, let's say his outlaw days. Maybe we could talk to him about like his ideas and his thoughts and his maturity and who he became. And I feel like with you and I, right, we kind of created this platform that's so unique that it kind of makes people see like, let's say our guests in a different light, which is really cool to me.
Most definitely, most definitely. And going back to the interview with Muta, where he actually talked about pretty much philosophy for the whole episode.
Yeah.
I never knew that background of from Muta. You know, I learned a lot about Muta from that episode. You know, so I absolutely get what you're saying. We do have a lot to offer. Absolutely.
Yeah, and by the way, one of the best like comments that I ever had was from your wife when she told me that we actually got you to open up about some stuff that she didn't know about. So I was like, oh, perfect. I actually, when Liz sent me that, I literally texted Alan and I was like, yo, we're pretty good at this podcasting thing.
Sure. You know what? I only seen it in the. I only got to know about that when you sent it to the Twitter message. I said, you sent Leon a message. I started laughing. Yeah, actually, it was a really good episode. And I've been with you for what 7 years, and some of them things I've not even told my wife. So I've opened up to you guys. More than I've opened up to my wife. Some of the things. But she really enjoyed the episode. She watched it back and she thought, I never knew that about you. I never knew you actually felt this way at that particular time in your life. So. You know, she really enjoyed the podcast, and hey, thanks for inviting me on.
Absolutely. And by the way, and like that's like for us the most meaningful thing that like people feel like they can not only open up, right? But for us, we feel like it also kind of makes us kind of feel cool that we have like these sort of exclusive episodes with people that like when we open up or when like other people open when other people open up to us, like you get this content that's specifically like only found on the Seize the Moment podcast show. Like literally that's it.
Definitely, absolutely. And Vegas is put I've got a bucket list of I've got a bucket list of guests. Yeah, I have a list of guests that not that I want on, but you know, I throw ideas about. So if we get them, brilliant. If we don't, you know. But no, I absolutely get what you're saying. You know, we have a lot to offer, and I think it's brilliant that from going from writing articles, which is brilliant in itself, and the subject, of course, Tupac, Outlaws, hip hop, for yourself, psychology and that side of things, and we kind of bring it together. You know, with you interview Mutai, you've interviewed Solomon Jenkins, and you're getting into the side of the mind where, the mind of an author, or the mind of a member of Tupac Outlaws.
Mm-hmm.
Like I never knew, and thousands of people never knew that other side of that person.
And like for us, by the way, one of like the dopest episodes that we did was the first one with Solomon Jenkins, where so it was before we read the book, which I mean, whatever, it has its, I guess, drawbacks, but it was also still pretty cool. So we talked about so it was called the post-traumatic growth of Mutabil. And what I really loved about the episode is that like with Solomon bringing in kind of the biography into it, right, we were able to piece it together with what we knew about psychology and kind of post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic growth. So what was cool is that the listener actually got to see like, here's Muta, right, going through this sort of tragedy, and like a phoenix, this is pretty much how he rose from the ashes, and kind of how his community sort of like hugged him and sort of helped him kind of move along and move forward. Yeah. And this is how a person kind of gets through the, from tragedy, or gets kind of let's say not only moves forward, but I would say even like the tragedy made Muta, like it defined his character, right? I'm not really even sure that he would have been the person he is now, like without it. Like it's sort of, from my perspective at least, it helped him really sort of deeply appreciate life in a much more significant way. I mean, I could be wrong, obviously. I'm not inside his mind, but my thinking is for him, right? Like this thing that was so seemingly terrible, or these series of terrible instances, kind of like helped shape him to the person that he was, or the person that he became. And so for us, the thinking is like, that's what we want, right? Like that's what we want our show to be. We want it to not only be like a plug for a book or whatever, right? We also want it to be like, how can our listeners benefit from your story, right? What is it that you have to share that we, or our listeners, or even us, right? What is it that you have to share that we can apply to our lives, right? How can we get through some of the struggles that we had?
Sure. talking about Mutar and how, what age was you when you first heard Tupac? Uh, your audio on?
Oh, sorry, I was covering the speaker. Sorry.
Oh, I know.
Thanks for calling
Oh,
that
we're
out.
deaf then.
So yeah, so the first time I heard Pac was essentially when in 2001, and the
Right.
first video that I saw was Until the End of Time. So I'm literally just sitting there one day as a kid, like just watching MTV, and I hear Until the End of Time, and dude, since that day, it's been my favorite song. I was blown away by this fucking song, especially like the start of it, where he said, "Perhaps I was addicted to the dark side, somewhere inside my childhood when this my heart died." I was like, what the fuck? I was like,
Wow.
that is so brilliant. That is so, and I became obsessed with that song. And so I actually ended up buying the day it came out, the Until the End of Time, the double album. And then of course, you know, everybody was on it. Muda, Noble was on it, Edie, all of the Outlaws, Castro, right? And I like literally was obsessed with most of the songs on it. I was like, yo, this is like some really fucking dope shit. So what was cool about it is, for me at the time, I really didn't listen to rap music. And here was this whole other genre, right? And this whole kind of like image of what life was like outside of like, you know, pop music, rock and roll, having fun, kind of like getting drunk. It's not like that was definitely part of their music, right? But there was this kind of like this raw side that you don't really get in other genres. And what was so cool about Until the End of Time, I remember, is that, so I don't know who produced the song, but the person who did it, he blended Broken Wings, Mr. Mister's Broken Wings, and he
Yeah.
obviously, yeah, and he merged it with like, you know, with Fox Until the End of Time, right? The original version of it. And I remember thinking like, holy shit, like this is one of the most amazing things I've ever heard. I didn't know you could even do this. I remember I was a kid. I was like, I didn't know that you could like blend like this like rock song that literally has nothing to do with like, you know, life in the ghetto or sort of being depressed and feeling like you're alone or whatnot. You know, I mean, even though the song is called Broken Wings, but it's about like love or whatever. But like they merged it together, right? And the person who did the hook, I forgot the person's name, but the person who did the hook was just so amazing, and the beat was amazing, and just to have Pac's lyrics. And by the way, the video was fucking amazing. Remember where he's like, "Yes, I am gonna say I'm a thug, but it's not because I want to rob you or rape people and things." He's like, "I came from the gutter and I'm still here." And I was like, "Yo, that's like the dopest like beginning ever." And then, and my favorite part of it is the ending where he says, what was it? So like the song ends and he says something like, "Maybe it's the thug in me," and then it's like it kind of fades out. To me, it's literally the perfect song. So that was the day I fell in love with Pac's music, and I still listen to I still listen to the song all the time.
Wow.
But that like to me is the most amazing thing ever.
Oh, that's amazing. It's an amazing story. And you know, that was around about the time I got into Tupac. You know, I was around about 14, 15.
Yeah.
And I kind of heard Until the End of Time. And I got all the angry songs first, but then a period in my life when I went back and actually researched, you know, these deep lyrics, what he was spitting on these sick records. And, you know, and my mind's blown how he put all this meaningful lyrics and, you know, history into his music, and still, you know, made number one albums, number one, you know, singles, and the music videos was off the hook. Like you say, you know, the Until the End of Time music video, it's awesome. It really is awesome.
Yeah.
Talking about how deep Tupac's lyrics are, and how you can actually study Tupac's lyrics, you know, and go back in history, and you know, he's telling the story of time. You know, he's going back, telling the political stories, and then also if you go back and as I'm sure you know, he's kind of predicting things that's actually going on in the world today. You know, it's still in today. So, have you ever passed on any of Tupac's wisdom, you know, to any of your clients or anything like that?
That's an interesting idea. Have I? Okay, so nothing comes to mind. I definitely may have. I mean, first of all, by the way, most of my clients know that I love Tupac. I mean, it's like it's no secret because I do talk about him in his life. I don't remember like anything in particular that I might have suggested or said, but I can tell you there was one song that like really appealed to me. even I think maybe now as much as I was as when I was younger was Papa's song. So like when I talk about, let's say outside of kind of therapy, when I talk to people about my life, and like I'm like, look, if it's a person that really like wants to get to know me, I'm like, dude, listen to Papa's song. If you want to know anything about me, there's like probably no other song in the entire world that I can relate to more than
Wow.
Papa's song. Like that song was it for me. Like the whole story that he told in that song, I'll bury moms like you left me all alone, G. Now that I finally found you, stay the fuck away from me. I was like, yes, that is me. And then like we went through, I remember when I was a kid, we went through like the string of like not stepfathers, but whatever. Like let's say, my mom would date different people and whatever, and it kind of felt shitty because you would get to know the person, and like Pac said, before the weekends they're kind of gone. And it's like, playing like you're kind of playing catch by yourself, a pitiful plight. I pray for a starry night. Please send me a pops before puberty. I would do anything for a sense of family unity. And so like that was me. And so I remember listening to that song and I was like, holy shit, man, I don't think I've ever heard anything that I felt like I really identified with as much before or even after that.
Wow, that's awesome. That is really awesome. So you can actually relate to it, like you say, Papa's song. That's you all over. If you meet someone, who wants to know
Yeah.
about you, go and listen to Papa's song, and I think that's amazing for an artist who comes across in the media, the mainstream media, as being a thug, but acting out all the time. But actually, if you listen to his lyrics, it resonates with thousands, millions of people, across the world.
Yeah.
I'm the same. I like that song. There's a few different songs that resonate with me. Not just his songs, is some of his poems. In The Rose That Grew from Concrete, some of the poems resonate with me. So, I think it's amazing for an artist who comes across in the mainstream media as being negative all the time, but a lot of people don't understand is, Tupac had a lot of positive. He gave a lot of positive things to people who needed it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and one of my favorite quotes of his was when he did that interview after, I think it was Above the Rim. And he said, he's like, look, I don't care about like, people who look at this as a fad. He's like, that's cool. They're going to pick up my music and then a week later or whatever, they're going to put it down. He's like, I'm literally doing this for the kid who lives a thug life and feels like it's hopeless. He's like, that's the kid I'm trying to reach. And I mean, obviously he wasn't talking about me, but the point is that I felt like in some way he was speaking to me because his music was really about like people, like especially children, right, who don't deserve it, obviously. I mean, nobody deserves it, but especially kids. But it was like geared toward them, like people growing up without fathers, right? Growing up, in poverty. I grew up pretty poor. It's pretty much saying that, like, look, guys, like it's okay. Like somewhere down the line, there's going to be some sort of spark or some hope, and you gotta kind of keep hanging on, right? Like the way Pac did. I mean, and by the way, he had a much harder life than I did. So for me to see that, and I was like, oh wow, man. Just like what I said earlier about Viktor Frankl, like I was like, if Pac can do it, maybe I can too.
Sure. And that's a testament to you as well, Leon. You've gone through, like you just said, you've gone through your upbringing and your bit of poverty, and that's a testament to you that you're actually helping people now. You're helping people, you're giving back to people, and also through music, through Tupac's music, you've kind of felt get what's the word gained. You've gained something that you can relate to, and now you're actually you're turning that around and helping people. So I think that's a testament to yourself, Leon, also.
Thank you, man. And by the way, speaking of that actually I can even link that back to Pac too. So remember the movie Tupac Resurrection, obviously? So there was like this really dope scene in it where they were talking about kind of like what it was like for him growing up with Afeni, since she was like really community oriented and she was a prominent member of the Panthers. And so one of the scenes from that film that really stood out with me or to me was when he said something like, I don't think he said, no, wait, was it him? It might have not even been that movie, but somebody I think said this about him. I don't think he said this about himself, but somebody said like with Pac, he always felt guilty, like because of who his mom was, right? And because she was so focused on the community that he always felt that he couldn't like, let's say, experience any level of success without feeling like he owes the community something. And honestly, when I heard that, I was like, oh shit, I kind of actually feel that way too. Whether it's good or bad, I don't really know, because guilt can obviously be debilitating and excessive too, which is kind of shitty. But the point was that, like, I kind of resonated with that, and it goes back back, piecing all of this together, it goes back to something that Carl Jung once said, the psychologist. He said, a gift really isn't yours. It actually belongs to the world. So if you were blessed with anything, right, you actually have to kind of give it to other people. It's not technically yours to keep or to profit off of. Not to say that you can profit off of, but it's mostly meant for others. And if you do profit off of it, like incidentally, cool, but that's not what it's there for. It belongs to the universe. And I felt like Pac more than anything understood that. Like I felt like that really resonated with him. For him, his music, it wasn't really just for him or for his, fame, success, or whatever. Like he said, with the kid living the thug life, it was literally meant for other people. And I really love that idea.
For definite, for sure. Brilliant way to sum things up. Vegas has just said, what's your top 5 Tupac songs?
Good question. Okay, so number 1 is definitely going to be Until the End of Time, just because that's it. That's the pinnacle. Number 2 is definitely Papa's song, because that's the one I identify with most. Number 3, I would say, is definitely The Good Die Young. So why I love The Good Die Young, again, it's about sort of the community, killings, different things that people are going through at the time that kind of like he lived around. Let's say it was kind of like, I think from my memory of it, it was about, sort of the hardships that he went through and other people went through. And obviously Muda's verse on that song is fucking dope as hell, right? Where, oh my God, Muda, and that's the one where he said, murder got me feeling like a star. But no, he said, what was it? Damn, I forgot the lyrics. But pretty much murder got me feeling like my death ain't far. I don't remember the exact phrase, but like that was like, that was like really, really dope. So number 3 is definitely Good Die Young. Number 4, I'm going to say Party Song, which I really love, listen to all the time too, Thug Passion. So that is like, first of all, the beat for that song is amazing, and the hook for that song is amazing. All of their Edie's, Napoleon's, Pac's verse is definitely the best. And who I really love, who doesn't really get much credit, is Storm. She was awesome. She was like one of the most underrated rappers ever. So Thug Passion, and let me see, what would number 5 be? Let's see if I had to pick one. Honestly, I'd go back to the Still I Rise album, and I would pick, you know what? Yeah, I would pick Still I Rise, just because why I thought Still I Rise was so deep was because he talked about like his mom I don't know if this really happened, but he did talk about like, what it's like to be born out of a rape. And he said like, kind of nobody cared about me. I was like this, kind of a cursed seed. So that was really dope. So Still I Rise was like one of those songs that you probably wouldn't normally hear from rappers or anybody at that time. So for me, that was like, whoa, like that was a huge like fucking reality check.
Sure. And that's a top. That's a solid top 5. Yeah, that's a really good top 5. just before we go, you got a message for your fans of your blog, and your podcast? What's coming next?
Oh, that's a good question. So, I mean, really just, kind of what's going on in terms of what's coming next. So hopefully, just writing blogs, kind of keeping up with it every week as much as I can. For the show, we actually have some really, really dope guests coming up, and I hope obviously all of you guys tune in. So we have Sheldon Solomon, who is the founder of what's called terror management theory, which just is like the idea of like how most of us deal with death when we become aware of kind of our own mortality. So it's like literally kind of this ubiquitous theory about like how do people deal with, their own kind of mortality. How do they respond to it? How do they treat others when they find out or they think about their own death? So that's really cool. And me and Alan are really pumped to have him on. Then we also have Margaret Rutherford on, and she's like an expert on perfectionism. She's a psychologist. That's going to be really dope. And yeah, and I mean, so like the idea is just, kind of doing the podcast. We probably have some really good guests coming up also in 2021. I really can't speak about them now just because nothing is cemented, but we're kind of thinking ahead and who we want to have on in the future. And I mean, yeah, even hopefully have you back on, man.
Oh, most definitely. I'd love to come back on your podcast. I really would. But it's been brilliant. So just before we leave, what's your social so everyone can go and follow?
Yeah. Okay. So you can follow me on, let's do Instagram first. So Instagram at Leon's Existential Cafe, on Twitter at Leon's Cafe 31. And you can find me on Facebook at Leon's Existential Cafe. But then also to plug the podcast too, you can find us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Instagram. You can find us at Seize_podcast on Twitter, Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook, and also like and subscribe to us on YouTube, just at Seize the Moment Podcast.
Most definitely, and get subscribing, and get following, because bro, I give it up to you. Your writings and your podcast is up there. It's number 1.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you so, and obviously much success for your show too, man. I can't wait to tune in for future episodes.
Thank you, bro, and thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for now. I remember now. I can say thank you for having me on. Welcome, Andy. Thank you so much for having us on. Well, sorry. Thank you so much for
coming
for
on.
coming on. Why did I say having us on? I don't even know where that came.
It's a pleasure, guys.
That's nerves.